learn about maths, you learn about English, but rights is a big part of a child's education.
There's an obsession with human rights and children's rights in Scottish education. And one manifestation of that is the Rights Respecting Schools scheme. Schools sign up for this scheme and they can get an award. Lots of schools do this in Scotland. And under this scheme, the children learn about rights. But in addition to that, it seems as though rights are promoted as being the very heart of human goodness and wisdom, the foundation of the school's moral vision. I'm going to show you a few clips now of children and adults talking about human rights under this scheme. And they really do seem to imbue them with an almost mystical power to make schools into a better place.
A rights respecting school is a place where you feel safe and a place that you think that you belong.
Everybody knows about their rights and everybody knows that they have the right to an education and they have the right for their opinion.
There's the literal meaning of being a rights respecting school, such as a school where you learn about rights, but I also feel there's a feeling within a rights respecting school, an ethos.
Children who are aware of their rights and aware that the school that they are in upholds their rights, are happy, they're confident.
It makes a big difference and we all feel a lot happier now because all the classes know about rights and everyone enjoys learning about them.
All of the stuff we do all links back to the main rights respecting rights of a child's kind of ethos, so the whole school is just all about rights respecting.
We change the world.
Yes,
We're change makers.
Here's an example of the sort of thing that passes for evidence all too often in Scottish education. 97% of head teachers at rights respecting schools said the award had improved children's respect for themselves and each other. Well, of course they're going to say that, and this is entirely subjective, and there's a huge bias intrinsic to it, because head teachers that have spent the money and promoted this to their staff, to their parents, to their pupils, are hardly likely to stand up and say, oh, we gave it a try, actually I think I made a mistake, it was actually a load of rubbish. But anyway, this is the sort of evidence that's presented for the scheme. Almost all talk about children's rights in Scotland has actually nothing to do with the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. It's just a vague, be nice message with a rights veneer on it. Now, human rights are good things in lots of ways. I don't want people to be tortured, I don't want people to be punished without a fair trial, etc., etc. But rights can also be politicised because they're often quite vague and open to interpretation. So later on in the video, I'm going to look at the actual text of some of the rights and see if it's got anything to do with what's being promoted in schools at all. But first, let's have a look at this.
One of the most important things was the charters, the classroom charters, and children buying up to that, and children actually saying that it wasn't about rules and it wasn't about sanctions. It was about the children creating the charters together with their teachers, and that was really important. It's not that the children are doing it alone, the teachers are doing it alone. It's working in partnership for this.
Classroom contracts, they're very fashionable in Scottish education. The idea is that when the class arrives for the first time, the teacher doesn't say, welcome to my class, these are the rules here, this is what you do, this is what you don't do. Then we'll all get on well and we'll get lots of work done. No, that's not the way to do it at all. You have to agree with the class, discuss it among yourselves and come up with a set of guidelines that will influence the behaviour during the lessons. I think with younger kids especially, this democratic interaction is actually a charade, because the teacher can lead it where they want to go. But it's basically founded on the idea, the ethical theory of contractarianism, that the reason you ought not to behave in certain ways is because your society or a certain group of people have agreed that they won't do that. Now, there's lots of flaws with that theory, but my experience as a teacher was very definitely that sometimes I want to say, for example, right, the rule here is when I'm talking, you listen. That's just good manners, and that way everyone's going to learn the most. But that would be frowned upon under this rights-respecting ethos. To say that you need to do something because the teacher says so, surely it should be because we've agreed it. That chips away at the authority of the teacher. It implies to the children that the teacher hasn't really got the right to tell them what to do. It's only if they agree it together that the teacher can expect the children to behave the way that they want them to. So let's say you agree the contract, then a child misbehaves in a way that's not covered. No contract can cover everything. What can the teacher do? The teacher might feel, oh, it's not in the contract, so I can't really do anything, that wouldn't be fair, so we'll add an extra line to the contract. In other words, the kid gets away with it. Look at this quote here from a pupil in a rights-respecting school. They feel empowered to debate with teachers. Now that sounds like a good thing, doesn't it? It sounds like, in the history lesson, they'll put forward their view a bit more forthrightly than they might otherwise have done. It's not meaning that. I would imagine if you saw that in action, you might probably describe it more as arguing with the teachers. Because a teacher, I think there's lots of times when you just want to say, okay, case closed, we've talked about that, end of story, this is the decision, you need to just do it. But with a rights-respecting ethos, it seems like pupils are going to be less willing to accept that. They're going to want to continue the debate. Then we hear it's not about rules or sanctions. Rules are definitely out of fashion in Scottish education. This is the influence of the inspectors, in other words, basically the government. The school I used to work at used to have a rule that said you mustn't bring in weapons and explosives. Now, call me old-fashioned and authoritarian if you like, but I think that was a good rule to have. But the inspectors would come in and say, oh, you shouldn't have rules. The rules are bad. Guidelines are much more enlightened. So instead of that being a rule, it became a guideline, just a suggested piece of advice that you didn't bring weapons and explosives into the school. Complete idiocy, but this just passes without comment in the hierarchy of Scottish education. Pupils in later life will find themselves members of societies and organisations that have rules, and they'll also find that you don't always get to make them up. But this line that rules are bad, it's ill-considered, hyper-liberal, idealistic rubbish. And that's what's dominating in Scottish education, because it's what's being pushed by the government. Right, next we come to sanctions, punishments. Now, I've talked about this before, the restorative model, you talk things through, there's no place for punishment. The belief is that punishment is unnecessary and counterproductive. Again, ill-considered, hyper-liberal, idealistic rubbish. There's a link at the end of this video to more information on this topic. Does the Conservative Party oppose any of this in Scotland? No chance.
This morning I'm sure you saw the recruitment process beginning for the head teacher. When the young people became aware that I was leaving the school and that there was going to be a new head teacher, their first reaction was, and how are we going to be involved in recruiting this new head teacher? So they were very, very keen that their voice was going to be heard.
The place where you work, do you get asked to have input into the appointment of your boss's manager's boss? Probably not. I mean, do teachers' careers really hang in the balance based on the whimsical and possibly bizarre views of young children? I mean, I'm sure that when children have input in this, it's actually a bit of a facade and not much weight, if any, is placed on their opinion, particularly when they're very young. Now, for older kids, if a candidate teaches a lesson or has a chat with some children and the senior staff asks them for their view, fine. But the problem here is what's being conveyed is they've got a right to have a say. Now, if you've got a right to say who your head teacher is, surely it follows that you've got a right to say that you don't want the head teacher anymore. Or to say, I never wanted you in the first place. And again, it chips away at the authority of the teachers and leaders in the school. Right, it's time to have a look at some of the actual articles from the United Nations Convention of Rights of the Child. Let's see how applicable these are to schools. Right, Article 6. Every child has the right to life. What changes about a school as a result of that one? What were they doing before? So any school we assume it wasn't killing its pupils before is not really going to be affected by that. Right, next one, what have we got? Inhumane treatment and detention. Children must not be tortured, sentenced to the death penalty, or suffer other cruel and degrading treatment or punishment. Children should be arrested, detained or imprisoned only as the last possible result for the shortest time possible. So you get the drift of this one. I can just imagine someone in Education Scotland looking at this and saying, detention, there's the word detention. Keeping a kid back for half an hour because they didn't do their homework. That must be covered by this, that must be bad. Okay, it says they shouldn't be detained. Okay, children should be treated with respect and care. Now, you can see the scale of things they're talking about here, but in schools that gets interpreted as they shouldn't be punished at all. Right, what have we got next one? 38. Government must not allow children under the age of 15 to take part in war or join the armed forces. hardly happening in any schools in any case. Right, 23. Child with a disability has the right to live a full and decent life with dignity, etc. Right, before rights came along, did people not realise that? Of course they did. That's just a common thing of human decency and morality. You don't need rights to know that. Next one. Each child has the right to the best possible health. Governments must provide good quality health care, etc., etc. Okay, fine. Problem with rights, of course, is it makes it sound like the government has to do this. It takes away any idea of gratitude. Actually, we're fortunate to live in a nation where people are willing to pool resources so that we can enjoy good healthcare. Now, forget all that, you've just got a right to it. The government has to do it for you, and there's no reason for gratitude. Again, but how does that change the ethos of your school? It doesn't. Right, next one. Every child has a right to an education. Again, how does that transform the ethos of the school? I don't get it. Primary education must be free. Secondary education, therefore, doesn't necessarily. Discipline in schools must respect children's dignity and their rights. Again, but that's taken to mean basically there can't be any punishments. Everything has to be just mushy and nicey counselling sessions. Education must develop every child's personality, talents and abilities to the full. I mean, does any school not already get that? That's just obvious that that's part of education. So adding in the human rights aspect adds nothing. Every child has a right to relax, play and take part in a wide range of cultural and artistic activities. Right, which school wasn't doing that already? Again, that's an obvious part of education. Adding a right adds nothing. Every child has a right to meet other children, to join groups and organisations. Again, it's so obvious. I mean, someone's at school, they're meeting other children, join other groups. I'm not quite sure what that's talking about, but what's that add to a school? Nothing. Every child has a right to express their views, feelings and wishes in all matters affecting them, have their views considered and taken seriously. You can see what they make of this one. This applies at all times, for example, during immigration proceedings, housing decisions, or the child's day-to-day home life. Now, immigration decisions, housing decisions, in other words, deciding whether you're going to live with mum, dad or whoever else. You should listen to children's views in these cases. Now, UNICEF and their rights respecting schools documentation have added in this, or the child's day-to-day home life. That's not actually in the text of the Convention of Human Rights at all. It says this. Child who is capable of forming his or her own views shall have the right to express those views freely in all matters affecting the child, views of the child being given due weight in accordance with their age and maturity. The child shall in particular be provided with the opportunity to be heard in any judicial and administrative proceedings affecting the child, either directly or through a representative or appropriate body in a manner consistent with the procedural rules of national law. So again, it's talking about who you're going to be adopted by, who you're going to live with, that sort of thing. So they're completely misapplying it. And this phrase saying in the day-to-day home life, they've just made it up completely. Article 26. Every child has the right to benefit from social security. That would transform your school, wouldn't it? What's next? Children from minority or indigenous groups. Every child has the right to learn and use their language. So what does that mean? So anyone who comes from wherever in the world with whatever language, they can turn up at school and say, I want to learn my language. And the school has to lay on teaching in that language. Surely it doesn't mean that. It does seem in Scotland like they think that is what it means. I think it actually means that you can't say to them, you're not allowed to speak that language in your family, but that's rights for you. They're obscure. Again, how does that help a school? I'm not sure. Governments must protect children from all other forms of exploitation, for example, exploitation of children for political activities. That's an interesting one. In rights respecting schools, what often happens is that older pupils teach their younger pupils about rights philosophy. I think rights philosophy is a political philosophy. So that's using pupils to instill a political philosophy in other pupils. I would suggest that could come under the category of exploitation of children for political activities. So under this scheme, rights are presented as the core of a person's moral code. You can build your ethical framework on the foundation of rights. But if you look at those, what's missing from them? Is there anything in that says, don't tell lies? No. Anything that says don't steal? No. Don't cheat on your wife? No. Think about the story of the Good Samaritan that's been taught to school children in Britain for centuries. If you see someone in need, you go and help them, no matter who it is. Do you get that message from rights? No. What message comes through from rights? It's the government's job to intervene and help everyone. Now, the United Nations enjoys a very positive image in Scotland. In the United Nations, what springs to mind? Peacekeepers, aid convoys, and that's all good. They do a lot of good, but it's not all positive. It's made up of nations, some of them are bad ones. None of them are perfect ones. It's politicised in lots of ways, has quite a strong social justice type ethos. It's pro-abortion, for example. And UNICEF is a United Nations aid agency. And again, it's not perfect, but it also does a lot of good. So how much influence should UNICEF be given to present its message in schools? Well, I think there's grounds to be cautious about that. The interpretation of rights that's promoted through the Rights Respecting School scheme and in Scottish schools in general is very much in tune with the SNP, Labour, Lib Dem, Green philosophy. It's a left-wing, liberal, progressive view of the world. Education Scotland recommends the Right Respecting Schools programme on its website, and you can see why, because it's bringing up children in line with the SNP's political philosophy. Human rights are a political issue, and the Scottish Human Rights Council did some research a couple of years ago about this, and they asked people about their view of human rights, were they positive, mixed, negative, or whatever, and then they classed that by people's political affiliation. Here are some of the results. So, people positive about human rights: 49% of SNP voters, 46% of Lib Dem voters, 43% of Labour voters. Note, even they're not that high. But anyway, Conservative voters, 17% were exclusively positive about human rights. That confirms what's obvious just from observing political discussion in any case, that generally speaking, parties on the left are very keen on human rights. Parties on the right can be more sceptical. Sometimes they'll want to withdraw from human rights agreements or courts, etc. So it's a political issue, and the left favour human rights, the right are more sceptical. So what does the Scottish Government say? It says in schools there's going to be a massive emphasis on rights. That's just clear-cut indoctrination. It should be scandalous, there should be outrage about it, there should be a massive controversy in Scottish politics, but no one notices, no one does any thinking, just, oh yeah, whatever, if that's what they're doing, who cares? It's unbelievable. If you look at the topics they bring in under the rights umbrella, it's all the things you'd imagine. Global citizenship, which is about pro-EU, pro-immigration, pro-multiculturalism, all the gender equality type, gender stereotyping, etc., etc. Human rights should be a topic, for example, in the sixth form, where pupils can write essays about them, for and against, strengths, weaknesses. But instead of that, we've got the rights interpreted to suit a certain political, educational establishment agenda. So in Rights Respecting Schools, we've got yet another example of flagrant indoctrination that goes unchallenged in Scotland. Right, here are some other videos on related topics. Do subscribe to our channel. We're a political party. There's a link below. You can join us. You'd be very welcome. You could also donate to us. Well, thanks for watching.